if I speak loudly enough. I'm going to go into teacher mode here. I have to stand up. No, come on. Be a bit more comfortable. I want to say that I'm no expert on anything, and I wouldn't consider myself an intellectual either, but thank you. Right, there is no doubt that feminism is experiencing a resurgence, and the proof is that we are here. It's a pity that there aren't more people, but well, it's a start. I want to talk a little bit about what feminism has meant to me and why I consider myself a feminist. For years, while I was a teacher at Westside, can I get rid of it? Yeah. While I was a teacher at Westside, I tried in small ways to create awareness in the students. I taught about different issues, which I felt were important to young girls, about why the woman had to change her name when she got married. I mean, that was often my first lesson in feminism in school. I would put my MS on the board, and I would ask them if they knew what that meant. MS, no, it wasn't a miss, it wasn't a missus, and so on. And I explained it, and that was always a good way into the subject. We would talk about boyfriends. You know, did a boyfriend have the right to tell you what to wear or not to wear? Which jobs were more appropriate for men and for women? Why was it that the jobs that women usually did were worse paid, and the ones that men did were considered more important? About why women had to do the housework, or most of the housework. I would ask them, do you have brothers? Yes, if they did. Who does the job? Who does the work at home? Do you help? Do your brothers work? And so on. Little things like that would make them think about things. When I actually spoke about feminism, they didn't really know what it was all about. But Marlene had just told me that when she was a student of mine years ago, that when she was going to go to my class, you know, I was going to be her form tutor. Apparently she was told, "Ma feminista." I didn't even know that there was that awareness there. Made me laugh. So I don't remember a particular moment of revelation when I realized I was a feminist. I think matters of social injustice were always important to me. So obviously becoming increasingly aware about the fact that women generally were treated unjustly, that was bound to become important to me. In terms of ideology, I was influenced by the feminism of the 70s, which presented a way of looking at things which was totally different. It embodied a whole spectrum of ideas which challenged everything about the status quo, about the way everything was done, about the way politics were done, about the way organizations were run, about the way people discuss things. It saw a lot of protests on different aspects of women's rights, and it was an exciting time. And I mean, I went to university from Gibraltar with a closed frontier where nobody spoke about anything really. Very, very closed society. So it took me a long time to become aware of these things. As I read a number of essays and books on feminism, I realized that to be a feminist, I didn't have to agree with all feminists. That you had to have your own ideas, that you had to work out what you believed in and what you didn't believe. I mean, I remembered at the time, in the 70s, there was at one end of the spectrum, you had feminists who were completely anti-men. You did have these feminists who hated men and who didn't want to live with men because they saw all men as potential rapists, and that was it. Now, that was an extreme, as I said, of the spectrum, but it did exist. And I say this because to emphasize the fact that there is no one brand of feminism. As in all other ideologies, there are many wide-ranging opinions on a variety of related issues. The feminism of a white middle-class woman is not the same as that of a poor woman in one of the developing or majority countries, as some prefer to call them, or even of a white middle-class lesbian. They all have different agendas, they all have different priorities. However, at its most basic level, feminism is about gender equality, about everybody having the right and the opportunities, not just in theory, but in practice, to develop their talents and fulfill their potential. Feminism concerns itself with how power is distributed in our society and with challenging the fact that to a very large extent it's held and wielded by men. and they don't want to let go of their power in many cases. It therefore requires the redressing of the social, cultural, and economic inequalities of our society. Something else that became very clear to me at the time, and I liked that about it, was that feminism wasn't about wanting women to do the same thing that men were doing. I mean, we didn't want a world of Thatchers. Basically, that's what Thatcher was. Thatcher was a woman who acted the same as all the men in power had acted. Feminism was about wanting to do things differently. It's about having different values. It meant getting rid of the patriarchal power structures and putting in their place structures that were much more egalitarian. I mean, the feminist movement, for example, was very interested or very connected to the peace movement. It was an anti-military, anti-war movement. That attracted me to feminism. The feminist approach that appealed to me was one which encouraged the involvement of as many as possible in decision making. It was about valuing the individual and empowering them. One of the things, I don't know if it came out with feminism, but I remember it was this thing about sitting in a circle when you went to discuss something, as opposed to a hierarchical thing, the important people at one end and then everybody else. This was about sitting around and discussing and being heard. Feminism presented the possibility of a more equal society, where power was not just held by the very few who controlled and in many cases exploited the many, but where power was more equally shared. It was about creating a society that was more open, more honest, and fairer to everybody. And it seemed to me then that feminism really did have the answer to many questions. And it seemed to me that if we went on this path where women were allowed to become full participants in society with all the implications of that involved, that we really were taking a huge step forward. And I think that for a long time, at the time I thought, oh, this is it. This is the way society has to go. And then for a long time it sort of became dormant and we seemed to forget about feminism. I know that for many years, apart from with a few friends here present, nobody talked about it. Nobody seemed to care. Feminism. Anyway, as I stand here trying to present some ideas of what feminism means to me, I am also aware of what a limited, simplistic view I am presenting, but we do have a time limit, thank God, I hear you say. I have to say, as an important aside, that I am very much aware that feminist concerns vary tremendously depending on which country, which class and race you belong to. If you look up feminism, if you go into any website, you will see there's all kinds of feminism. Marxist feminism, anarchist feminism, French feminism. They have a special category all to themselves. I will say that there are women in many parts of the world, and I have to say this, very aware that there are many women in the world who are still little more than chattel, who have no rights whatsoever, who live lives of brutish existence, and who might consider themselves lucky if they are married to somebody who doesn't beat them on a regular basis. This might be the pinnacle of their aspirations. I am aware of the fact that in certain societies women are forced to marry their rapists in order to maintain their honor and that of their families. I'm aware of the fact that in many parts of the world education for girls is non-existent, that millions of girls and women are trafficked for sex and slave work, that millions of girls suffer genital mutilation. I'm aware that in war zones throughout the world, the rape of girls and women is systematically used as a weapon of subjugation. I do not pretend that the inequalities that women still experience in the first world, in the Western world, generally, obviously we do have all the awful cases of rape and so on, but these also, and I have to say, this also exists against men. And this is a hidden subject. The rape of men is something that I'm not going to go into now, but it is a hidden subject that will eventually be out there. But it's even more of a taboo subject than the rape of women. I felt I just wanted to say that. But, okay, so even though we don't suffer all these terrible things that women suffer in other places, so just someone here. So although I do not pretend that the inequalities that women still experience in our world, in the Western world, are on a par with a kind of hellish existence I have given some examples of, these are issues which I think should concern us all and which we should, as a global community, try to eradicate. Having said that, even though we live in a society which has evolved immeasurably from some of these societies, I have referred to, we also suffer from the consequences of institutionalized inequalities which need to be challenged in order to make the best progress we can in the society that we inhabit. And for this reason, and in an effort to make some practical suggestions as to how to change power structures between men and women in our own small community, I'm going to focus on 2 points. One, the first is that we need to introduce a system of parental leave which is equally available to women and men. I don't think there's much point, we're always saying, well, because I'm a women don't want to go into politics, and women don't want to do this, and women don't want to do that. Yes, nothing is going to change until we have parental leave where both the man, if there's one in the picture, we know that sometimes the woman might be left on her own, but if there is a man in the picture, that man is as responsible, or should be as responsible, for the child care and everything else that goes with, is associated with bringing children into the world. A few years ago, fathers were granted, in Gibraltar, fathers were granted 2 weeks of paternal leave. Isn't that nice? This was presented as a progressive move. In fact, welcome that it might have proved to new parents, because that's better than nothing. 2 weeks is better than nothing. Like a piece of stale bread is better than nothing. But, you know, well, what is that? It's a gesture, really. It's a bit of a token gesture. If we are seriously intending to break down the traditional gender roles, which I believe limit both men and women in our society, we need to do something far more radical. We need to introduce parental leave, like, for example, I've taken the example of Iceland because that is considered to be the best available, which is basically the woman gets 3 months, the man gets 3 months, and then they have another 3 months which they can share as they see fit. I think it happens that there are women who take the extra 3 months, so there is still some discrepancy. But basically, there are lots of different systems. Again, I'm not going to go into them, but you can look it up yourselves. In most places, you have a system where the man or the woman can choose to take, a certain amount. But of course, what happens in this case is because of all the prejudices and all the conditioning that we have, it tends to be the women who take it. So we're in the same situation. What the more progressive societies are doing now is they are saying, okay, you have the woman has 3 months and you man have 3 months, and either you take it or you don't get it, and the wife doesn't. The woman doesn't get it either. So it's take it or leave it. And basically, what they find is that, of course, most men are going to take it, if otherwise the couple isn't going to benefit from it, and that, of course, this has a long-term effect in the way that men are involved with their children, they bond with their children, and they also get involved, years on, they are still much more likely to be taking, their responsibility for household chores and so on. Because if not, what you get is, you're landed, the woman is landed, not just for the 3 months or the 6 months of maternity leave, but for the rest of the life, really. Somehow that doesn't seem to change. The woman in many cases goes back to full-time job, she still carries on doing everything else. And of course, where am I? Sorry. Yes, well, if this happens, if we do have proper parental leave, this will in time have an impact on the way men and women are viewed in the workplace. It will not be a given that only women will be the ones to take leave if they have a child, so that therefore the woman becomes a burden, which is what a lot of women used to complain about. Now I think it's illegal to ask the question, have you got a boyfriend, you're planning to have children, and so on. But even if they don't ask the question, because it's no longer legal, they still think it. So that women sometimes, and young women, can be seen as a burden because they're going to take maternity leave. Now, if you had a situation where the man is just as equally, is just as likely to take the time off, then things will change. And it should put women on an equal footing when it comes to promotions. It will mean that women as a majority experience now will not just be expected to take on board most of the responsibilities of childhood care. Right. It means that men will benefit from establishing a very close bond with the child from the start and so on, okay? So I said that before. Right, and then the second point I'm going to mention is co-education. Tamsin, you said that, that it's a good thing. I think it could be a good thing, but I don't think it's automatically going to be a good thing, because I think you will have benefits, you will also have problems arising from it. I feel very strongly that we're coming into co-education much later than most other countries. And I think we should use this opportunity to ensure that we learn from the mistakes which others have made before us. We need to learn from all the research which is already out there, and we mustn't allow the prejudices which exist in the larger society to be mirrored in the school environment. You know, you actively have to work against that. Some months ago I wrote a letter about this, and I quote from it. Many studies have shown unequivocally that teachers themselves have implicit and explicit gender biases which manifest themselves in the way they teach. The biases which girls and boys themselves bring into the equation also need to be considered. It is essential, therefore, that teachers should receive the necessary training to ensure that they are aware of these issues and that the right initiatives are taken for schools to regularly review attitudes and put an end to the reinforcement of negative gender stereotypes. I mean, if you're going to have a situation where, for example, boys are going to be allowed to behave in certain ways, to be macho, and the girls are going to be, I don't know, bringing their own prejudices and things into schools, and you're going to allow this to go on, and you're not going to challenge the ideas, you know, the way they interrelate and so on, then is not going to be a very good thing. I know that it will take a great deal to break down the gender stereotypes that exist in our society. People cling to what they know, men and women. I know that already when I've said something about parental leave, and some people will say, oh, but women want to have the full leave. Women want, well, okay, women, that's what you want, but you can't have it always. You know, you can't just keep to the old gender thing, but then want what's suitable, you know, what's convenient, yes, but what you don't want at the time, no, and so on. Okay, you have to think about these things. And to end, although it will take a lot of changes in many different areas, I think that because we are a small society, the introduction of progressive measures can have a very broad impact. The introduction of radical legislation regarding parental leave and the enlightened teaching of our students could really give rise in generations to come to a society where equality between genders is much more of a reality than it is now, with all the benefits for everybody that this would imply.